Hello, I'm your host, Clare Wuellner, and joining me today are Tracie Harris and Jen Peeples. By the way, this is GB 2.0. This is going to be the Wing It episode, I'm pretty sure. Everything's going on the fly today because of a busy weekend with the conference. GB 2.0 is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. I have just chatted briefly with Tracie and Jen, and they each have a lot of things to talk about, and I have a lot of things to talk about. I think we're just going to take them one at a time and do a round robin. Who wants to go first?
I'd like to just go ahead and start out because I have like a big thank you that I need to issue. So we had the American Atheist Convention in Oklahoma City this weekend, and some of the folks from ACA were out there doing some podcasting and mingling, and it was fantastic to get to reconnect with people that I had met at other conferences, some people who had been on the back cruise, you know, people that were there who, as speakers, and, you know, like some I got to meet in person for the first time. There were several, you know, first-time meetings, several people that I knew from social media that I had never gotten to meet in person. That's always fantastic.
Yeah.
And one of the encounters that I had was a woman who was at she was tabling for a group called Pitchstone Publishing. And I'm totally fine putting that plug out there because she offered me a book. She said she really liked the fact that we put out secular women's voices, and she just wanted to say thank you. And she's like, it was the last day. They were packing up, and she's like, I have to carry all this crap with me, so take a book, right? Mm-hmm. Like, have a book. So I told her thank you, and I looked around, and I chose a book called Caught in the Pulpit by Daniel Dennett and Linda Lascola. And I'm reading it currently, and it's a good read about the how Clergy Project got started, some of the research behind that, and so it's just very interesting to me. So I told her, you know what I'm going to do with this book? I'm going to read it, and then I'm donating that to the Free Thought Library. And she said, to the what? And I said, the Free Thought Library. It's the Atheist Community of Austin's, basically our building, but we do house a library there, and we have, library services. And she ended up saying, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pack up one each of every book on this table and box it up and ship it to the Free Thought Library.
Fantastic.
And by the time I got back to Austin and texted Mark, who handles a lot of stuff for ACA, including the library, he had already heard from her and provided her with shipping information. So she's serious about it. We're getting a big box of books. And then she said, well, the bestsellers are gone because this is the end of the conference. She goes, when I get back, I'll box up the bestsellers and send you a box of those as well. And I just wanted to say a big, big thank you to Pitchstone Publishing for that generous donation to the ACA Free Thought Library.
Right on.
Yeah, just amazing.
Yeah, very cool.
Very, very. Thank you.
That's my start.
Right on.
That's a positive note. Yeah.
Hey.
Jen?
Well, we've had a lot of things happen in Austin since the last show.
A lot.
So we had another angry, disaffected dude go on a bombing rampage.
That was just... I actually got a package the other day, and it made me think twice.
Yeah.
And that's...
And it's interesting that you say that because part of the reason that I contacted Mark was to let him know to expect a package.
Right.
Yeah.
It was part of my reasoning in contacting him.
This is unique to Austin. If you're from someplace and you don't know about it, we had a bomber who... Jen, you go ahead. It was your thing.
Well, no, I mean, it's just this guy, the way it started out, there was a bomb that went off, and the police investigated it, of course, because bombings are not normal for Austin. This place has one of the lowest crime rates pretty much anywhere, especially for a city this size.
Especially for one of those hotbeds of crime, which are the sanctuary
cities. Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that we're so safe, that we're not overrun by, criminal immigrants and
I mean, how
fearing
safe
for our lives.
How safe is Austin? Well, if you stripped completely naked and walked down 6th Street, probably nobody'd bother you.
You'd probably just get a lot of thumbs up. And
Yeah.
There are lots of people who have done that. I mean, look at
Yeah.
Leslie for years and years, and
Oh,
there's
yeah.
the thong guy on his bicycle who rides nothing but a thong year round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just posted an article from Texas Monthly that was written a few years ago about how safe Austin is compared to other large Texas cities of, similar, size. And said something like, "Oh, when will they come and save us from, our
Yeah.
the horrible sanctuary city plague of whatever it is we're supposed to be
Afraid
having
of.
a horrible time with." I'm sorry, I'm totally
No,
derailing
it's okay.
this.
It's fine, but
Go ahead.
I mean, just the whole point is that this, a bomb going off in Austin was such an anomaly.
Yeah.
And initially, the cops investigated it, and they thought it was related to, like, some kind of drug cartel thing.
Sure.
And that they got the wrong address. And so that was the deal. They thought, okay, it was just, wrong address. And then, like a week later, something like that, 2 more go off in, close temporal proximity to each other. And they realized that it's not just a drug thing. There's like a serial bomber out here.
Yep.
And that was the first time they had a clue that, hey, this is happening.
And that's when the feds got involved.
Yep. Next thing you know, we had hundreds of FBI and ATF people in Austin working with the local police to try to figure this out. And while they're working on this, a 4th bomb goes off in a completely different area of the city. It was at the entrance to a very popular hike and bike trail in southwest Austin. 2 guys pushing their bikes, I guess coming off the trail, ran over a tripwire that was attached to a children at play sign in this neighborhood, and this bomb went off. And then one went off in a FedEx facility in Schertz, which is between here and San Antonio. And that's when they realized, hey, maybe we have this guy on video.
Yeah.
They started looking at video. They did have him on video. They found another package in the FedEx facility in Austin. And it was pretty much a short path from there to figuring out who this guy is. And he ended up killing himself.
With a bomb.
With a bomb, yeah. Blew himself up in his vehicle
Load up real good.
as police were closing in on him. But anyway, that was our bomber story. I guess the thing that happened was that, these bombs, the first 3 bombs went off in parts of the city that are, it's predominantly Black and Hispanic people that live in these neighborhoods. And so that's the communities that were disproportionately affected by the first couple of bombs. There were some people that went off the rails and said, okay, this is racially motivated. They're targeting these neighborhoods or whoever it is. And at that point, we didn't really even know. And then there were people that were making the ridiculous claim that it was being suppressed by the police, that nobody was reporting this. And
What?
yeah, and it's like, well, the first one, they didn't even know that it was a serial bombing. You have a data point of 1. By the time the next 2 bombs went off, they realized they did have a serial bomber, and that was widely reported in the police. And so it wasn't like we didn't know.
Yeah, but maybe the rest of the country didn't know quite so quickly, but it was everywhere here. Do not touch packages. Do not touch any package.
I was, that week that the second 2 bombs went off, I was actually working in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and it was widely reported in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And it was on national news. But it turns out that, I guess fairly true to form, the bomber turned out to be a pissed off young white dude.
And super Christian.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
Yeah, and we don't know to what extent his religious beliefs informed his actions, but I think it's fair to say that he was radicalized by something. And I mentioned this on the Atheist Experience. He had blogged about his opposition to marriage equality before, and had seemed to have some extremely conservative, right-wing Christian beliefs. And I'm sorry, guys, this is it's 2018. Those are radical beliefs these days.
They are.
So
And it's certainly radical if you feel like you have to kill over it.
right. And I think that one of the things we need to be doing in 2018 is calling these things out for what they are. This is extremism. This is not, benign, run-of-the-mill Christianity. I'm just practicing my religious beliefs. When you start blowing people up, whether that's just because you're mad at something or, your religious beliefs tell you should do that, at the very least, his religious beliefs didn't tell him he shouldn't do it. Or if they did, he didn't listen.
There were 2 people who were actually killed, and I'm sorry I don't know both their names. I know the young man, Draylen Mason, who died through. I'm in the music scene here in Austin, the classical music scene, and it's just a huge loss. He was, by all accounts, a lovely, lovely person, and that light's gone. It just really breaks my heart. So this son of a bitch took out somebody who was really a great person. It breaks my heart.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know the other guy's name either, but I understand he was a father and
right. He had now I remember.
Also, by all accounts, a lovely person. Contributing to the community and doing good things. These people weren't hurting anybody.
Yeah, I think for me what's really sad is the idea of the views that he was espousing really aren't considered as extreme as they should be.
Right, and that's why I think it's important to call these out as the extremism they are.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He was, upset that gay people had rights, upset that women had rights, upset. I mean, he's just basically calling out people objecting to people being treated like human beings if they were somehow different to him in ways that he was taught to disapprove of. And there are many forms of Christianity that don't do this.
Right.
And so when we look at the forms that do, I think we need to say this is the fringe. Regardless of how many people are involved in this, I mean, most people that are walking into a church don't even think twice about what they actually believe from any kind of a religious ideological perspective. They've got some amorphous view, and you start to ask, and there's like, I don't know, I come for the bake sale and, stay for the child care. And
it's true.
Or they serve fried chicken at the fellowship after the service.
I really, the idea of these people that take it this seriously now, and I understand that they have got some tape of the guy. He talks a little bit, but I don't think it's been released. I honestly don't know what his beef was. I don't know what his motive was, but we do know what he was raised with. And I think if we would have seen a blog that he had posted where he was posting extremist Islam, people would be like, well, man, look at the hate he was indoctrinated with, and so I don't think that it's unfair to at least say, this is a person who had an upbringing that was, I'm going to say, not healthy.
Right.
I don't know whether it contributed to what he did or not, but I do think it's fair for us to look at that blog and say, you know what, we need to start saying it is so not healthy to look at other people as non-human or want to deny them basic fundamental rights that other human beings in our society have because they are not what you approve of. They're not harming people. They're not, I understand that we have a system to deny rights to people who go out and do harm to society, whether it's negligent or willful. We have a scale here on how dangerous you are, how dangerous you intend to be, and whether or not you can be corrected. I get it. So yeah, we do deny people rights, usually once they've broken certain social contracts and proved themselves to be a danger. And it's an imperfect system, but the point is we don't just randomly go out and say, I don't like who you want to marry, and so you don't get to get married. I don't like who you I don't like the fact that you don't want to put your life and health in danger to donate your body to somebody else, surviving, and therefore you don't get to have basic human autonomy that everybody else in our society enjoys. I think that we need to start looking at those things, and when we see them, say, this is an extreme view.
And what it is not is mental illness.
Exactly.
I hate when they pawn it off on. It's very common with the white male to have it pawned off on.
Right.
it is so far from
It's
that.
remarkable that Muslim males are never mentally ill.
It was their
It's just their
upbringing,
religion,
their
yeah.
religion and upbringing.
And by this guy, the bomber's religion or his upbringing included being homeschooled. As part of a Christian homeschool community, and he was part of some kind of, they called it a Christian survivalist camp. It didn't really sound like they did a lot of survivalist kind of stuff, but whatever. It seemed like there were all the elements of extreme religious indoctrination in his background, and a fair amount of social isolation that would have kept him from being in contact with some of the people he later came to hate and blame for stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what he was, I really, for example, I can't even say that what he was homeschooled with represented what his final beliefs actually were, right? Like, I mean, it could be that it would be a more liberal upbringing, although I would be skeptical because I think most people homeschool because they want to protect the kid. The religious people that homeschool want to protect their children from things like science ideas, social studies ideas that counter religious indoctrination.
Right.
And so I understand the assumption to say, well, he was being indoctrinated with these things, and I think I probably just, alluded to that. But the reality is people were saying, oh, there were people who were like, oh, no, he was raised in a good Christian home. And I'm like, was it a good Christian home, or was it a really dangerous Christian home? Was it a home where they were teaching hate, where they were teaching that you should use the law to infringe on other people's rights because it conflicts with your religious views? I mean, is that the kind of Christianity that he was being taught? Now, ultimately, whether he was taught in homeschool or not, that's the kind of Christianity that he appears to have ended up with. So there was somebody exposed him to that, and he absorbed it in some way in order to be espousing it. And I do think that whether it resulted in the bombings or didn't, it's still an ugly ideology that should be called out as fringe, and even other Christians should be condemning this.
Yeah.
I mean, and some do. To be fair,
they do.
there are some that stand up and say, that's toxic. And thank you to those
Yes.
who are willing
Thank you
to
for
at least call it
standing
out,
up. That's great.
because a lot of you won't criticize it. So
Dangerous territory. I guess I'll go next. And on a fairly light note, a couple episodes ago, we talked about Mike Hughes, who was in our Bless His Heart segment, who was going to prove that the earth was shaped like a Frisbee. So last episode I said, what happened to him? And so this episode I'm actually looking up, and he did attempt it. He did come down to earth in a very unpleasant way. Apparently he was taken away in an ambulance. But some of his quotes were kind of amusing. What did he say? He'd been frustrated with assumptions that he chickened out, so he manned up and did it, which is awesome.
See, I was reading a really, and I can't remember where it was, but it was a really funny account of his launch that described it as he climbed into this thing that looked like it had like a missile attached to it and closed the cockpit, and without any countdown or warning whatsoever launched himself.
there he goes.
And he only got to, I guess, a little less than 2,000 feet, which is not really high enough to get much information. But apparently it was a pretty dramatic thing, and his homemade rocket ship immediately did a 180 and started heading back down to Earth.
You have to think with the time and resource that he spent on that, he could have just bought an airline ticket and gone higher.
Well, yeah.
And looked out of the window.
Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah, just take pictures out
There
of the window.
maybe there's someone's already invented this wheel.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah. So anyway, let's see. Oh, and aside from trying to get into space, his other aspiration is to run for governor.
Yeah.
And so, please, oh Lordy.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. There were so many other opportunities for him to get some information about this.
Well, clearly he's got some sort of agenda.
Yeah.
All right.
You could, like, go to a really high part of the Earth, say, Pikes Peak or something like that, and take a drone with you and fly it around and get pictures,
Oh, and here's a line that Tracie will appreciate. Am I glad I did it? Yeah, I guess. I'll feel it in the morning. I won't be able to get out of bed, he said. At least I can go home and have dinner and see my cats tonight.
All right.
And that's like, yep, animals, yeah, they love you no matter what now, don't they?
That's right.
Okay.
They don't.
They're willing to overlook the fact that you walk around with your head up your ass all the time.
They don't care as long as that cat
Keep
food.
feeding. Yeah. Food keeps coming out. I love this person.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, so who goes next?
I guess I can segue something here. So this was kind of an older article that I had. Oh, well, first let me just say, if you haven't seen it at GV, I did post the Mike Pence Pride Festival T-shirt, which is
Awesome.
yeah, you kind of have to see it to appreciate it. It's it reminded me a lot of the Putin image that went around for the longest time, like with Putin all made up and.
Oh, so pretty.
Yeah, and I understand there's a couple ways to look at stuff like this. Like on the one hand, people sometimes look at it and they're just like, oh, but you're kind of playing into, like anti-trans or whatever. But I think when you have a person who is freaked out by stuff like that and you're not, and you kind of can freak them out by by leveraging their prejudice or their freak out. And so I kind of look at it more in that vein. And so with this, it's got Mike Pence with his like superstar sunglasses on and it's all colorful and he's got the pride flag behind. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you just know he's going to love this. So, I mean, Mike Pence probably will never see it, but I do think there's something to be said for taking bigots and then having a big festival, done with where you like feature them as the selling point and you're making merchandise off it. And I don't know, there's a part of me that just kind of loves that.
Well, sometimes you have to laugh or else, it's just all negative and ugly.
To use that
sort of
bigotry
thing.
to raise money and awareness for the cause that they're against is sort of a beautiful irony in some ways.
Yes, it's so hard for me to look at the news these days, and when I see stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, I can roll past and see the next article without crying.
Yeah.
So
I skipped. So there's that. I'm going to close that window since I have now officially plugged it. But there was one where it was like, a guy. It was just it's nothing real. I guess that's the sad thing is there's nothing really unique about this story. So a guy and a girl, man, woman, they have this baby together and the relationship doesn't work out and he's going to give her the kid for visitation. I guess they're sharing child custody or whatever. And she has a new boyfriend and he says he'll only hand the kid over if she brings her boyfriend with her. She brings her boyfriend with her. They realize right away that something's wrong and that he's not going to let them take the child back to be with her for her portion of the time or whatever. And he ends up attacking them and shooting the boyfriend to death, the new guy. And I posted this at the page, and one of the things I was talking about was the idea of, for me, every atrocity, every offense against somebody else, that it all, so much of it starts with denying a person their agency, denying a person their autonomy, and which is the same as denying their humanity. This is what objectification means. And it may or may not be tied to sex. I don't necessarily believe that sexualizing something is the equivalent of objectification, but I do think they can go hand in hand. But I don't think they necessarily are. And some people equivocate those things and say that's the same thing. I don't agree. To me, when you start treating a person as though you're not respecting their autonomy, you're not respecting their agency, you're saying that thing that makes them a person as opposed to an object, their agency is not to be respected. So now you're objectifying a person. And out of this can come any sort of jealousy, right? I'm going to control your sexuality, to genocide. You're not human beings and I can kill you as animals. You're like whatever. It can be this very, very overt form of objectification where you're literally denying their humanity in like every possible grotesque way, down to small things in life where we just don't respect another person as a person. And it's one thing, it's like we talk all the time about ideas are not, should not be respected all the time, and that's a fact. And some ideas certainly shouldn't be respected. But not respecting the agency of the other person, right? And this ties into what we were talking about earlier. It's like, or what I was talking about earlier with regard to, yeah, of course, when somebody begins to disrespect the agency of everyone else as a whole, starts doing damage to society, or doesn't think about it, is inconsiderate of it in a way that causes negligent harm, you have to be aware all the time that you're dealing with another person and that you're dealing with another agent,
Right.
and that they view their agency with as much regard as you view your agency. And they expect you to respect that. And in return, you have every right to expect other people to respect that. And when I see it disrespected, in my head, it's like, this is almost the one crime against humanity. This is like the one thing, right? Like where the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. I mean, no, denying other people their agency, denying them their
Right.
humanity, if that's not the one thing, right, that you don't do, I don't know what would be.
Right. And interesting you bring that up, because you would think that if there existed some omniscient, omnipotent being, and this being was issuing commandments to its creations, it would have said, hey, don't deny each other
Yeah.
agency.
Respect,
Respect each other's
And I think
agency
to
and
some
humanity.
degree, right, the golden rule is about that, right?
Yeah.
It's an attempt to say, and that's why you see it. Like, so many people will say the golden rule is repeated in so many forms, and it's because that's a basic human social species function, right? To see the other as the equivalent in some ways as yourself. Like, you are more equal to me than my cats are to me. I can, socialize with you in ways I cannot socialize with my cats. It's just, that doesn't even come close. It's not at all even on the same level, and will never, well, I'm saying never be. I mean, maybe one day we'll have like GMO cats that can socialize with me. I don't know. But for now, this is my unique species. And this is what I have to recognize and regard, that you have that agency that is like my agency. And it is unique in a way that is unparalleled.
So if you were to do a Venn diagram with agency and empathy, what would that look like? Where do you see the relationship between those two?
I honestly believe that you could be completely devoid of empathy and still regard other people's agency. You may not have a feeling attached to it, but I think you can understand that concept and do it. Like, I have a friend who says they have no empathy for anybody, and yet they operate on what they call fairness. They're like, I have to use fairness because I don't feel empathetic. And so, I mean, some people are sociopathic, psychopathic, right? You're going to have different levels of capacity to feel. And so the question becomes, are we going to condemn people for what they feel or what they don't feel, as opposed to what they're doing or what they're trying to do? And so I think that a person can have a lack of empathy and still recognize that they're dealing with another agent. They may not be able to have the feelings associated with it. They may have to work on that from a different angle, but there's still a capacity to know this is another agent.
Yeah. And I think if you can't recognize someone else's agency, or you just refuse to acknowledge it, it doesn't matter if you have empathy or not, because your actions won't.
Well, yeah, sometimes empathy can get you into trouble,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you're empathetic to the point that you won't step in and stop social harm,
Right.
If you're basically like, I'm going to be so empathetic that I'm not going to, I refuse to stop this person from doing something that is harmful because I'm just, I want to respect their agency. That's kind of like the God thing, right?
Yeah,
like, free gives us free will.
Yeah,
and so,
I can't interfere with
but
your
there
free
are
will.
people like that who are just like, I am completely passive. And to me, that becomes almost a detriment to society when you have that level of passivity.
And it's interesting because I see some of this in some of the situations, like the Stanford rapist, where basically the judge, his father, they were arguing that, you don't want to do so much damage to this young man's life. He's got so much potential. It's like, dude raped a woman, behind a dumpster.
Brutally.
Yeah. I mean, how much potential did
So, I
does
mean,
he really
it
have?
might sound weird, but I do think that a person can have too much empathy.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes your moral metrics, if they go too far, can stop you from stepping in from when maybe it would be best to do so.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to sort of put a kibosh on those moral feelings and say this is not the time to exercise them.
Yeah, too blurred of boundary. Yeah, I see that. That makes perfect sense. Outstanding. Jen, I think it's your turn.
All right. Well, I have an entry for the Bless Their Hearts segment.
Oh, wow.
If
Here
you
we
want to
go.
jump into that.
Yes.
So Pat Robertson of the 700 Club recently complained that he's being dominated by homosexuals.
Oh, so really? Does he understand the language that is used there?
Well, and it's funny because I actually can't find where he made that actual quote that he was being dominated by homosexuals. But you know,
That needs to be a T-shirt.
Well, do we know he said it?
It was what it was. It was on an episode of the 700 Club, and he was complaining about how gays and lesbians have infiltrated the entertainment industry and academia, and there's this left-wing bias in the media, and they're now using them to dominate society. So, anyway, yeah, and
There's a few articles here. Let me see if I can.
yeah,
find
and
the
so
quote.
it says statistically they've dominated the media, they've dominated the cultural shift, and they've infiltrated the major universities.
They've
And
just become
it's
more
just
visible.
Unbelievable what's being done. A tiny minority makes a huge difference. The majority, it's time it wakes up. You know.
Yeah, he says, okay, so here's the quote. We have given the ground to a small minority. You figure lesbians, 1% of the population, which I don't know where he's getting his stats. Homosexuals, 2% of the population. I mean, even the, even conservative estimates are like 10%.
Yeah.
That's people that are like strongly identifying, and not even saying like, yeah, I also have same-sex urges. And,
right.
that's all. That's statistically all. But they have dominated the media. They've dominated the cultural shift, and they have infiltrated the major universities. It's just unbelievable what's being done. A tiny, tiny minority makes a huge difference. The majority, it's time it wakes up. It kind of reminds me of of racism, and how people were freaked out about, and it's interesting because when he's saying dominated, I think what he's describing or what he's seeing or complaining about is just advocacy, right? So advocates, people who basically, like me, are, I'm not gay, but I'm not going to let you trample somebody's rights just because they're gay. That's not acceptable. So for him, he sees this as he's being dominated, or the society's being dominated, but really all that's happening is that society as a whole is standing up and saying, we're just not going to let you be a bigot and discriminate against people.
And they're visible. They're coming out. They're in your face.
But I think what's freaking him out, though, is this kind of power that he's seeing, right? Like that on their own they probably wouldn't have. So when you have a small percentage of the population, they have to gain advocates because on your own, that small percentage is not going to have that much impact. And so when he sees it spreading but I mean, it's just when you're on the outside of this and you look at it and you say, look, this person's being oppressed. I'm not going to let you oppress them. And that's what's freaking him out, right? I'm being told that they're not letting me just oppress them anymore real easily. And so this is what's flipping him out.
They're messing up my narrative that says they're all awful people.
Right.
They're coming out and proving me wrong.
Yeah. And where have we seen this before? Atheism.
Right? Yeah. And feminism.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And it's just the way this all kind of was put out there. He's complaining about being dominated by homosexuals. I thought that was just so funny, and how this guy, he doesn't seem to have a concept of how what he puts out there, how humorous it is to some of us who are watching this and basically watching the last gasp of this kind of
Bigotry?
ultra-conservative,
I hope
Bigotry.
it's the last gasp.
right-wing stuff that he's. But yeah, I agree. He's complaining, and part of it is that the traditional way of dividing groups, where you convinced lesbians that their interests were separate from gay men. Well, in some cases that's true, but the broader picture of it is that we're stronger if we align ourselves and move forward together. And that if the rights of women can be separated from the rights of lesbians, then you can carve off bits of that. And the feminist movement back in the late 70s, early 80s kind of convulsed over that, and then finally just said, screw it. We're all in it together, know. And so same thing is happening now on a larger stage, where you have, Black Lives Matter moving forward. You've got, atheists coming.
Right.
out, in large numbers.
Coming out makes
And
all the difference.
It does.
Yeah.
The visibility is important because it's very difficult. And I've had this conversation with so many gay people who were struggling with whether to come out or not. And what I've told people is it becomes very difficult to discriminate against someone that you know personally. Mm-hmm. And what you see, there's sort of like the stages of discrimination, where you have someone who's actively hostile and spreading bullshit about them, and then they find out that the person sitting next to them that they've known for years is gay, and then suddenly it's like, oh, but you're different. So they have to carve out this special little place for the person that they know. Mm-hmm. And then because this person that they know came out, then the person over here decides, hey, maybe it's safer for me to come out now too. So they come out.
Yeah.
And then the guy has to carve another little special place for this person over here. And suddenly all of it just collapses. And if they're at all intellectually honest, they have to just discard all of the bullshit they've been saying.
Yeah, and I mean,
it goes away.
That's what it boils down to, right? So you own the social power, you own the narrative. Mm-hmm. You get to make it scary for people to be openly whatever.
Right.
And while you've got them silenced, you get to say evil things about them, and it goes unchallenged. So I say all these evil things about this group of people, and then I frighten them into silence, and I own it, right? I own everything. When they start to come out, when they start to speak up, it's easy to dismiss one or two, but you can't dismiss it when it starts to become like dozens, and then when it starts to become their friends, and then and after a while, when you have people that are allowed to stand up and tell their own story, and you don't get to tell their story for them,
right?
You no longer own it, and that's why being open, being out, for anybody that can be, is so important to do. And to me, that's like the I know not everybody's in a situation to do that, so I don't want to make it. I literally, when I say for me, I'm not saying this is my view of everyone. I'm saying for me personally, being out is such an easy thing to do that it's almost like I can't not do it. It'd be ridiculous.
Right.
If it's the one thing I can do, then that's the thing I need to do.
Yeah. Well, and that whole owning the narrative thing was, it was one of the biggest parts of why Don't Ask, Don't Tell was enacted. It wasn't that the people that opposed open gay service thought that they could like eliminate gay people from the military by having this just don't talk about it. But as long as people weren't allowed to talk about it, they could own the narrative. Mm-hmm. They could pretend that gay people in the military were whatever they wanted them to be. And it wasn't good.
Well, it was so bizarre, right? Because you had, at the same time you're implementing a don't ask, don't tell policy, right? Basically saying, for the gays who are in the military, you can't talk about it, but we're not gonna basically go looking for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at that same time, you had arguments ongoing about should we allow gays in the military? Mm-hmm. And it's like, talk about owning the narrative. I mean, how can anybody be having that argument in the face of open, promoted legislation saying if you're gay and in the military, we need to just not talk about it? And in the meantime, people going, but if we let gays in the military, look at all these crazy, awful things that will happen. Yeah. And it's like, you're still pushing that narrative. Yeah. Like, I can't, how?
Well, and those of us who were in the military at the time, we're looking around at each other like, how is this different than it was yesterday when we didn't?
Yeah. We were hiding then, we're hiding now. Yeah.
It's like there's no difference. And then I want to put something out there too, because there's a similar thing that happened with atheists in the military. For the longest time, there was that old cliche, there are no atheists in foxholes. Mm-hmm. And part of the way the military controlled that narrative was that when you went to get your dog tags and you had to list a religion on your official paperwork, atheist was not a choice.
Yeah, it's like other or something, wasn't it?
It was no religious preference. That's what you could put.
Yeah.
And the same thing went on your dog tags. Yeah. You could not get atheist put on your official dog tags, which meant that if you died in combat or something like that, and they called a minister or something, you would probably have some, whatever denomination was available, muttering nonsense over your corpse, in some kind of supplication before they shipped you off. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the more I thought about that in the military, the more offensive that became to me.
Oh, sure.
The idea that it's not even that they're so much disrespecting my wishes, is they're not even acknowledging my existence.
Well, erasure, right?
You know,
That's what that's called.
And so that's what it was all about. It's like, we can control this narrative, we can maintain this no atheists in foxholes, as long as we don't even let them identify as atheists on their official paperwork. Well, that got changed, and so now you can actually get atheists put on your dog tags, and so you don't have to worry about the local shaman.
It has a little atom too. Didn't they get the little atom? Isn't that the logo, or is it something else?
There's actually no logo on your dog tag, so it's just
Not on the dog tag, but like on the tombstones.
yes,
and
on the
stuff,
tombstones,
They do
yes.
have that. You can get the little logo. That's
they have a wide range, which I think there was some conservative group that like lost their shit over that too, because you could put something that was not a Star of David or a crucifix on your grave at Arlington or something. Anyway.
It is interesting that you brought that up. I searched and searched. I was looking for a gift for a friend of mine at the convention this weekend, and one of the things, when I finally found it, I was like, Foxhole Atheist was the shirt, and I said, I want that, and I picked it up, and it was medium, and I was like, I need this in a large, and they looked and looked and looked, and they said, no, that's pretty much it. That's the only one we brought. And I thought, oh, that's horrible. I mean, I can always go get it online, but you want to get at the conference. And then I went online and I found a bunch of other versions of that message, and that was, it's just great to see. It's really great to see that. And again, it's just about the narrative. When people are allowed to stand up and say, oh, actually, there are atheists in foxholes. Here I am.
Yeah.
I love it anytime I see some indication of somebody being secular out there in the world and I don't know them.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. It's almost kind of an exciting. You want to run up to him and say, "Oh, hey,
Me too. Oh my God. All right, so I guess it's my turn. This is kind of might be a long sort of segment here. I, in preparation for today, just plugged in atheist and women in Google, and just the results themselves were interesting to me, what came up. And so here are some of the things. Atheists who are women, religion in America, and that's just the Pew Forum thing. But black atheists matter. Many women are, quote, in the closet, unquote, atheists. 50 top atheists, blah, blah. Something about Madeleine Marie O'Hare. Women atheists are genuinely considered monsters. Did anybody read that in The Atlantic?
No.
Women atheists are genuinely considered monsters. And that was written in 2016. That's the other interesting thing, is to look at the years that these are written, because it vacillates back and forth, it seems like. Dating while black and atheist. Brazen sexism is pushing women out of America's atheism movement, and that's in 2016 again. So there seemed to be a real, downturn in opinion of women in atheism in that year or something. Lots of articles about that. Atheism's shocking woman problem. What's behind the misogyny? And of course, that is the recent Me Too, etc. Why millennial women are embracing atheism. So it turns the corner and goes the other way. And then why aren't there more women atheists? It goes back and forth. So let's see, there were a couple of articles that grabbed me the most. Where are all the atheist women? And here's one, sexy atheist women. Guess, I clicked on it, it's clickbait. Sexy atheist women. They had, who were under 40. Jesus Christ. So guess who they had? Guess who they were? Movie stars.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
That's important.
Oh, yeah.
That's important. Living Without God, Female Atheists and Stigma. And another Black Atheists Matter, How Women Free Thinkers Take on Religion. Okay, so one of the articles was in an actual journal, and it was called Sovereign of Herself, Women's Narratives of Lived Atheism, by Marta, I'm going to screw this name up, it is very it's got lots of consonants and not very many vowels. I'm going to spell it. TRZEBIATOWSKA. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. And this article rolled it all up into a nice, neat package for me. Because a lot of the research that you can find out there about women atheists are the activists, the people who are kind of in your face, or just raw numbers where 3/4 of atheists are men and 1/4 of the nuns, so to speak. There's a lot of research on nuns, the N-O-N-E, N-O-N-Es, not the N-U-Ns. But looking at women who self-identify as atheists and are not activists, they are just out there in the world the same way most women who go to church just go to church, sort of thing. And she did research. She interviewed 20 women from all over the world who qualified for this, and what she found, I thought, was really important. The reason the search came back with all over the board stuff is because we really don't understand this yet. There's a lot to learn. And she says, she's starting the ball rolling, basically. We need to understand the very most basic thing first. There's a quote in the article that I just love by Eva Ingersoll, Robert Ingersoll's daughter. And she described the future woman who will belong to no church, will be fettered by no senseless formula or puerile dogma. She will be sovereign of herself, free and fearless in thought, word, and deed. Ooh, shivers up my spine. Good stuff. So the participants were all self-identified atheists with no propensity for activism. They were just people living lives. And it focused on a number of themes. One was the process of and reasons for becoming an atheist, the societal attitudes to atheists, the link between atheism, well-being, and morality cross-culturally, and atheist activism. So there was... That's what most research focuses on, those things. Let me just, the reasons why people become atheists, societal attitudes, and that sort of thing. That's the old stuff. She's talking about, I'm sorry, I said that in the wrong order. She's talking about what she wants to look at the very most basic level. One of the things that jumped out at this woman, at Marta T., sorry, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, was that atheist women are very clear in their beliefs. There's no, well, I kind of believe in a God, but I don't know what to call it, equivalent for these atheist women. It's just, I'm atheist, period.
Right.
God, no apologies there, no, like, I'm just kind of thinking about it or whatever. So that I thought was very interesting. Let's see. There was no script when she interviewed the people, but she said, here's the thing that's important, I thought. Most sociology of everyday life focuses on actions or doings of the individuals and groups under scrutiny. Aspects of social behavior which are labeled as absences or a lack escape our attention. And that's the thing about atheism that a lot of even atheists miss, I think. When people call in to the Atheist Experience, when people say, what defines an atheist? What's the pat answer, ladies, because you both get this question all the time? What's the pat answer? What's the thing that makes an atheist an atheist?
Just don't believe a God
Don't believe in
exists.
God. This article talks about how it's more than that.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. It's not just not believing. It's a bunch of other things that go with it. Because if you are an atheist, and especially if you're a woman, that has an impact on how you live.
Yes.
And so she talks about these things, and I'm like, yes, let's start at the very most basic level. This article is brilliant. Let me get to one of the things that very much influences how women in particular, and of course she did not interview men, but I have the sense that women have a different experience because A, women are supposed to keep the religion in a household or in the world. They are the keeper of all things religious, generally speaking. Mom is the religious rock of the family sort of thing. And also we're supposed to be polite, and we can't hurt people's feelings or step on people's ideas and things like that. And so that influences how women can go about their business in the world.
Historically, women's role in society has been to be the civilizing influence on
There you go.
the brutes who are the men.
Right. And religion was seen as that whip
was another-
and chair,
yes.
and it's just, the women she talked to, some of the things they said were very pithy. I loved it. If you one of the women, if you separate faith, which I obviously don't agree with, from other beliefs and views, I don't agree with them on anything. They tend to be very patriarchal, intolerant of differences and minorities, and these things work like a red rag to a bull for me. I can't talk to them, so I try not to interact with them. The fact is, this woman is saying, and I see this in my world too, if you are an atheist, there's usually, more often than not, kind of a worldview-ish that goes with it. I know there are atheists who believe ridiculous things and who are on the other end of the scale on things. But this woman reflects what I think a lot of women's experiences is, and that is that religious people tend to have a worldview that is not going to work with my sort of worldview, just in general. So, and I'm glad, really.
I just let me correct real quickly. Like I would probably tend to express that as being an atheist in a society where religion is important.
Yes.
Will definitely influence your experience in that society. I do think that not believing in God gets you in the club and you are an atheist, and that's really all it takes.
Right.
But the influence that it has on you, so for example, we get letters from people who are like, I live in such and such country and everybody's secular and it's like nothing to me. But the more religious your society becomes and the greater, like we were just talking about the narrative, the more religion owns the narratives, the harder it is to be atheist in the society, and the bigger the more grotesque those narratives become about you, it just becomes more and more difficult, up to the point where if I open my mouth and say I don't believe, I could be killed, right? So there's societies that go to that extreme. And so just to kind of head off, because I can already, hear the flood of, wait, that's not atheism. It is an influence in what you're going to experience when you don't accept a prevailing social belief that is promoted in like a really strong way and that demonizes your demographic.
Right. So I agree, and it's where I'm going with this. You said there's a narrative if you're religious.
Sure.
There is a narrative if you're not religious.
Yeah, it leaks out into the society for sure. It becomes. I mean, we consider ourselves a secular society for the most part. I mean, there's religious people that argue that, but I think even most religious people understand separation of church and state and why it's important.
Well, yeah, I think most do.
And so when I'm losing my train of thought. What were you just saying before?
That there is, yes.
The narrative that comes
being an atheist means one thing.
Right.
You don't believe in any sort of God.
Oh, the secular leeching of these ideas. So, yeah, I mean, when people say, like, it's a Christian nation, obviously I don't agree with the idea that we should be founded on any religious principles. But I can't deny the big, heavy lift that religion has, hoisted onto the entire society, to the point that like everything we consider to be norms are based on religiously influenced ideas from 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. atheists are vilified.
Yeah.
And just yesterday,
Whether you're religious or not, there's a pretty big chance that you're either accepting some of these concepts without even questioning because it's like a social construct by now, or that you actually have bought into some of this stuff, as bought into the secular, veneer of arguments that they sort of paint over and gloss over these religious views with.
Yeah. And I know that part of the problem, and one of the things that I love about this article, is that these women were willing to say, I'm an atheist. Just talking to someone yesterday who said, well, I don't really believe in God, but blah, blah, blah. And so I consider myself agnostic. I said, really, if you don't believe in God, you can stop right there and say you're an atheist. And she physically recoiled. And I'm like, it's not a bad word. It just means what it means. And so normalizing, like you say, and becoming part of our own narrative.
I would like to just mention that I have never seen this before, but this weekend at the convention, I was just hanging out with Foundation Beyond Belief. I was like hanging at their table for a little while.
On.
Yeah. And so a guy came up to talk to us and said, he was having he'd never been to a conference before, didn't know whether he was atheist or not. His friends are atheists, and they keep telling him he's an atheist. And I said, well, here's a question for you. Do you accept it as true that a God exists? And he said, no. And I said, okay, then you're an atheist. Welcome.
Yeah.
Well, this disturbed him a lot. And he seemed very confused, very anxious, was describing like a lot of anxiety. I couldn't understand it because he's like, well, then, what next? And I said, what do you mean, what next? Nothing's changed. You're still the same person you were before there was this late. And he's like, but I just don't feel like I am an atheist. And he said, basically he started to describe that his friends had told him, oh, this means you have to reject all kinds of things that aren't scientifically proven. And you have to, and I was like, no, wait. You don't have to do anything. It's just a label that describes your position on this question. You don't accept it as true, so you don't believe it. That's fine. You're not saying it's false. You seem very, very agnostic in this position. Eventually, one of the women at Foundation Beyond Belief, Noelle, was at the table, and she took on the conversation because I was having difficulty understanding where all this discomfort was coming from. But he was clearly upset. And she started to talk to him a little bit and sort of took that over. I've never seen somebody have that reaction, but he was confused. I would say confused, anxious, scared. I don't know how all to define what I was looking at. He was like a mess.
Which I think is obviously, someone had convinced him that being an atheist means all of these other things, by definition. And I think that's why it's important for us to control the narrative of, who we are.
Yeah.
Because somebody had fed him a line of bullshit. Now, It was probably a bunch of other atheists who got themselves wrapped up in this idea that, oh, we're atheists, that means we're rational, we're smarter than the religious people, all these other nonsense ideas that have percolated through organized atheism and
I felt really
atheism.
bad for the guy. I wanted badly to help him, but I could not understand what had suddenly changed in his head.
I'm wondering, that sort of narrative that you're talking about, that the atheists were trying to foist on this fledgling atheist, is that really the atheist narrative, or is that what religious?
I think she's saying it's an atheist narrative or an atheist narrative.
Yeah, but that comes from ignorance, and so it seems like it comes from the other side.
It actually, and maybe Tracie was going to talk about this later, but about this alt-right, intersection between certain atheist groups and...
I didn't have a speech prepared for that, so feel free.
There's an article about how there's far too many atheists, kind of dabbling in the alt-right movement. And I mean, part of it is this idea that I guess there was a study published a while back whose methodology was very poor that suggested that atheists are more intelligent than religious people. Right. And there's a lot of people out there that think that because they've arrived at the correct answer to the easiest question out there, that they are more rational and, more able to use the scientific method, and they are just the bestest out there now.
Same person, same
And
brain.
that it extends to everything else. And so I think that narrative comes with a whole lot of baggage. Because if you're brand new to atheism and you know that maybe your religious background has influenced your ability to use critical thinking skills, that's a skill.
Yeah.
It has to be developed. It's not something that you either have or you don't. And so they come into this thinking, I guess, feeling that they're kind of inadequate. And it's not that they're inadequate, it's that they just need more practice doing some things that they never got a chance to do when they were religious.
It's been shut down.
Yeah.
In very effective ways.
And that's not a character flaw on their part. It's not their fault. It was just a lack of practice. If nobody ever taught me to throw a football, and I tried to throw a football for the first time,
I can't throw a football.
I'd suck at it, But if I was sitting there thinking, gosh, I'll never be in the NFL, and I got all depressed over that, it's like, well, that's not the only thing out there,
Plenty of other things, like engineering amazing things.
And just to say, like, scanning these articles, like I pulled up the Atlantic article on, female atheists and the monstrosity of female atheism. And it's kind of was hitting on something Jen said about women being the gatekeepers, the religious gatekeeper. And what the article was basically saying is that because of that role, that expectation of women in our society, that they are sort of the gatekeepers of all things modest and all things chaste, and all that. When you have a woman that's an atheist and you divorce her from that narrative of religion gives you morality, religion gives you your foundations, religion gives you your all these wonderful things, you can't love without God, and so it sort of strips her of all our cultural trappings of femininity, right? Because all these things feminine, she's not maternal, she's not loving, she's not moral, she's not modest, she's not, they like divorce her from all these things, which even though every atheist is divorced from that, like Jen was saying, we don't have that expectation most often for the narrative of males in the culture. It's sort of like, they have this horrible narrative on them that they're all like pigs and dogs, and, it's like these awful things that we just like, oh, we have no expectations here. And it's hideous, right? But and then on the other hand, women, although there's these glowing expectations, that's sort of like a gilded cage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horror of its own, because you don't dare step out of that, because then you are you're worse than the dog and the pig, and you're like you've just fallen from grace, like utterly. And then when I get into this other article, right, the research piece, at the secularismandnonreligion.org, and I just kind of read through the conclusion, because we just, I was presented with this just before the show, and so I did get a chance to read through the conclusions. And one of the things that I found was interesting was the categorization of the non-action as agency, right? Like choosing not to act is a choice. And I have to respect the choices of these people. I will say that there's a big part of me that if I could, have my wish, what it's describing is that these women in the study that expressed inaction, and they're that did not respond to these things, they felt angry and they would step out when they felt it was egregious enough to do so. But in the meantime, they just kind of tried to keep their head low, keep the peace. I'm not going to bring this up. And I know women like this, right? Like I have women friends who are really, really great people. I mean, people that are that accommodating, it's hard not to like them. It's like they're just concerned with other people's comfort. They're concerned with other people being happy. They want to make sure that they're not being rude or mean or nasty and make you feel bad. I mean, these are people that everybody likes. I mean, these women, when I introduce them, everybody likes them. And they're atheists. But to them, it's this thing. I just keep my head down. I don't really go there. Now, a few of them have families and have had to draw boundaries with family, and they did, like this article's talking about, when it came to like their kids or the family sending them religious crap. Or, I mean, at one point there was a woman, they moved and they didn't give the address to the husband's family. They were just like, you know what? They don't need to know where we live now because we can't stop the flood of religious crap. And so,
what is it you say about family, Jen?
If you act like family, you are family.
There you go.
And I
You don't,
live by
you're not.
that.
And so when I'm reading this, I'm looking at this choice and this agency and the attribution basically saying that, women are taught to be sort of these non-assertive, non-aggressive, and I don't condone aggressiveness, except in an extreme situation. Assertiveness, totally down with assertiveness, that idea of asserting yourself while still trying to be respectful of others, but not letting yourself be walked on. I completely am down with that. But it talks about the idea of them not wanting to be out, and the reasons they're not out, and how that's their choice to kind of keep the head low. And while I get it, it's sort of, and I don't mean a shame like as in shameful for them, but I mean it's kind of a shame for us that we can't have those people as open advocates, because while she says, there's like one part where she says something like that they counter this idea of like the angry atheist, but it's like you really don't when you're not out. You're not countering any narrative when you're silent about your atheism. You're countering nothing. You're hiding. And there are reasons to hide. And you don't have to have a reason to not be out. You can choose to not be out, and that's your choice. And I have to live with that and say, okay, I can't make you be out. But when I see these women, it's like I really wish there were more people walking around with you who were just like average people that weren't, saying nasty things, that weren't presenting in ugly, aggressive ways, that other people would have to say, that's a really, really sweet person, and you can't not like them, and they're atheist. I wish there was so many more.
Yeah.
I mean, I meet them, but I don't know that the public sees them that much. We see them a lot in the community. Tons of people who are involved in like humanist efforts and good things and are wonderful people. But still, somehow the negative atheist narrative endures.
The rest of the article does have examples where the women would stand up for what they believed or have conversations with people. It depends on the person, of course. I don't think they're all trying to be doormats in order to keep the peace. But there were three main areas of life in which their atheism became what she calls either flashpoints. Yeah, flashpoints. And that one of them was atheist women and rites of passage. So weddings, christenings, and funerals. So at these points, the women said that these were the points at which they had to stand up for what they did not believe most frequently.
Right.
And
because religion owns those rituals.
Right.
I mean, they have claimed ownership, and they don't let anybody else touch it.
which dovetails into our email that we got from somebody this week at our email thing. And Tracie, I know you have that.
Oh, yeah,
Can you
I do
read it
have
for
that.
me? Somebody asked about.
All right, it was very brief. We'll just do first name here. We'll say Dorothy wrote to us and said, "Hey, love listening to all the blogs. Something has struck me lately that I've had trouble getting an answer to. I don't plan to be married again, but I'm curious. Without the supposed, quote, correct, unquote, wedding under the sanction of a church, what is the legal wedding of an atheist? By a justice? There has to be a standard. Thanks."
And there is. Actually, the marriage is a civil union. The
Yep,
religion stuff is just trappings. That is the part that you don't need.
Right.
And in fact,
That's a ceremony.
right, it's a ceremony, and it's a rite of passage, and it's fine.
Right.
But the actual legal thing is a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And
The ceremony is the wedding. The marriage is the legal license thing that for which you're licensed, that the state issues.
right.
Yeah.
And anyone can get ordained to do it. I am ordained to marry.
Yeah.
And I have married several couples, and it's
Yep.
there are exactly, and I can tell you, there are exactly two things that have to be included legally. And one is that that you don't have any previous obligations, marital or otherwise, and do you freely give your consent to be this person's spouse? So really, you could get a wedding ceremony over in 2 questions.
Right.
Yeah.
But they do all the other things.
Wouldn't be romantic.
It wouldn't quite be. And believe me, I did one marriage that I was really like, wow. They had me come in the house, do the bare bones, paid me, and it was weird. It was a little weird.
I wanted that actually at my wedding. And I mean, I didn't want a wedding at all. I just wanted to go in, and I was like, do we just file the paperwork? And they were like, no, you have to go before the judge. And I'm like, what the hell do we do with it? Does he just stamp it, or what's the deal? And so we go before the judge, and apparently this judge had like a whole thing, right? Yes. So we had to stand, and he had his, like, do you have your vows? I have vows, And so now here's the thing. We were like, hey, bring the vows. Like, let's go with your vows. Like, what do you got?
They say?
So the judge brought his vows. No, it was super cool.
Okay, good.
He pulled vows from multicultural stuff and different. Some was religious tradition, some was not religious tradition. I mean, it was a big mashup of very interesting things, and I was literally quite moved by it. So I was kind of at the end of it. I was like, it was kind of nice actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it was cool.
So when Jenny and I got married, we actually went before the JP, and she had this like long speech that she read, and it was all about, this thing you're about to embark upon and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, we've been together like 15 years. You can like dispense with all this stuff.
Yeah, it could be funny. I went to a Jehovah's Witness wedding for an older couple. It was like someone's dad was remarrying. And so it was this, an older couple. They had kids, grandkids, whatever.
Yeah.
And I guess they don't have pastors, but like, I think it's like more of a like linear thing with Jehovah's Witnesses where there's nobody above anybody else. Like I don't know exactly how you get chosen to do the ceremony or whatever, but the guy that did the ceremony did this like prefab thing about marriage being about procreation and blah. And I'm just like, man, are you looking at this couple? Like, seriously, they're not going to be procreating. You might want to dial that back a little, because this is kind of funny now.
Well, that was like when the marriage equality case got to the Supreme Court, and the opposition was making their argument that about procreation being a primary purpose of marriage, and I think it was Elena Kagan who was commenting on, well, what about if an elderly couple gets married, where you think that they're going to be procreating, and the guy is like, well, it could happen. He's
apparently that's the assumption at the JW church, right?
she's like, so if I'm getting married, because she was, I think, in her 50s at the time of this argument or whatever. Anyway, she's like, so you think that if a woman and a man, and they're over 50 and they get married, that they're going to be having kids? And he's like, well, not going to happen. She's like, I don't think a lot of kids are going to be coming out of that relationship. Yeah. She's like, I'll send you a book.
Exactly.
They have not heard of menopause?
I don't know if they understand, because, this is the same crowd that thinks that when a woman is raped, the female body has a way of shutting that thing down, so there's not going to be a pregnancy from that.
Jesus H. God.
So
another funny wedding story. My husband and I got married almost 18 years ago, and a person who married us was a friend, and he took the wedding certificate thing to the office. So 10 years down the road, I don't know why, but my husband's insurance required that we show our marriage certificate, and I thought, I don't remember where I put that exactly, but it must be in our important documents file. I'm pretty organized. And so I looked through that, and it's not there. And I looked through his personal file. It's not there. Mine, not there. I'm like, well, I must have lost it. So I call down, and I say, I can't find my marriage certificate, but I know you can issue duplicates, so can I please have one, because my husband needs it for his insurance, or for our insurance. And she looks, and she says, we have no record of your marriage.
Whoa.
I'm like, what? This is a joke. You got to be kidding. Look again. Look harder. No, we have no record of your marriage. I'm like,
oh, man.
How about that? So I said to my husband, if you want out, now's the time. We're technically not married. I know there's common law marriage and all that stuff, but we're technically not married according to the civil procedure, the actual law.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting experience to have that happen to you, because you're like 10 years into this thing, and you're like, okay, do I still want to be here? Hell yeah. And that's kind of a neat feeling.
Yeah.
So we went down to the office, and here's the weird thing. They can backdate it to whatever the hell date you want.
Oh, that's
We
cool.
got a new form.
Wow.
And they backdated it to our original wedding date. And they took a picture of us. And if you go down to get your marriage license, you will see our picture up there among all the pictures that they have of people getting married in the office there. And I've had several friends say, "Oh, I was down here and I saw your picture," and they send me a picture of us being up there in pictures. So yeah, it is very much a piece of paper, it's a civil thing.
A piece of paper, and apparently not that sacred if they can just like redo it and backdate it to whatever you need it to.
Clearly, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's another topic. But okay, so I want to go a little further into this article. We ready for that? Okay,
Yeah.
so the rites of passage, and I hope that answers Dorothy's question. Another area was mothering, like you mentioned, Tracie, and I know,
Yeah.
Jen, you have done a lot of this, and I have done a lot of research in this. And Dale McGowan, if you're a parent and you're wondering how to parent, because it is difficult to parent as an atheist, if you have children in the world, you are an adult, you can deal with whatever comes your way. A child raised in an atheist home encounters all sorts of stuff that children shouldn't have to deal with. And helping them through that is part of your job as a parent. And Dale McGowan has some amazing books to help you through that. So that was another way. And people took different tacts. I'm atheist, but you need to decide, make up your mind. Others were like, you're atheist, just like me, and they took different tacts. But so there's another way that it is a very concrete. There's a very concrete thing that happens because of people's atheism. Where's the third one? Help me. I can't find it. Atheism and mothering. Women's rites of passage, and there's another one. Why can't I find it?
You're saying that was the second one?
Yeah, there should be
Not
there's
much
a
under
third.
that. Yeah, before she gets to the
I
conclusion.
have them numbered. Oh, managing encounters with religious individuals. Yeah, that's something that we all deal with, and so if you're an atheist, yeah, you don't believe in God. But it also means that you have these things to deal with, and they're especially pertinent to women because of the societal
reality
that has been put on us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this article makes me very excited because it's the start of something important in terms of understanding the sociology of what it means to be a female atheist. And this is worldwide. They had people from Poland, United Kingdom, several countries, including the U.S.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the values of articles like this is that it illustrates that, like a lot of things in life, the way women experience this is going to be different than the way men experience it in many aspects.
Absolutely.
And like you brought up early on, the typical, I guess, our typical image of an atheist is a dude,
Yep.
usually white, well-educated, and, he's more outspoken. And for women, that experience is going to be different. Mm-hmm. And there are, I guess, a higher percentage of male atheists out there still. But I think that, I think that it might be that the methodology that people use to study the rise of the nuns is maybe not as well tuned to find the hidden female atheists out there.
Well, I think, didn't you just cite something earlier that millennials, it's like a higher number?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's coming up.
Yeah.
yeah. But I just talking to people in, like, the community, I'm finding out that there are an awful lot of women out there who are atheists.
But they don't know it.
They don't. they don't describe themselves as
Right.
atheists,
Oh, I don't want to be an atheist. They're horrible people.
but
Am I a horrible
you know,
person?
you see them, you're out walking in the neighborhood on Sunday morning, and you see them out walking in there, and you're like, oh, hey.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you pass each other on the sidewalk, or you start a conversation, and it turns out, yeah, they haven't been to church, and, you know, they don't even remember when.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really evident if it's like Easter weekend, like we had last week, you know, and you see them out on Sunday and they're not doing Easter things. And so it's like, okay, yeah, I know you. But yeah, you find out these things, and like I said, they don't identify as atheists. They're a little scared of the term, because in some cases that's been so vilified. A lot of people express they'll say, oh, I'm agnostic, because they're still wrapped around the idea that you have to be absolutely certain to declare that you're an atheist.
That's the old definition. Yeah.
So they do that. I run into people from time to time that express some like vaguely deistic, kind of a weak deistic view of things.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think there might be something. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
so whatever.
I get that.
And, you know, sometimes I feel like having those conversations, and sometimes I don't. Those conversations can get a little tedious sometimes. And
Well, you have enough of them when you're the host over and over and over.
well, the other thing is it depends on how much I want to invest in this particular individual. You know, if it's somebody that that we're going to meet and have coffee from time to time, and maybe form a more in-depth friendship or something like that, then maybe I'll have that conversation. If it's somebody that, you know, I'm going to wave at him at the dog park once a month, and I don't care.
Right.
Yeah. It's just good enough that we're both here on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Walking our dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things about getting back to how I arrived at this article, just Googling atheist and women, I'm actually very heartened to see so many articles that talk about people of color being atheists, because only within the last few years have, well, me included, white women been kind of brought into the world of how it's different if you're a different color. And we're becoming more aware, we're learning more, we're paying more attention, and that makes me very happy. What else? Oh, I don't want to forget this. I forget this the past times we've done this. Tracie, you just mentioned a book that you were reading.
Oh, yeah.
I would like to encourage our listeners to go to either our Facebook page or somehow contact us. And if you have a book you would like us all three here to read, and we can give everybody out in the world enough notice that you can read it, and we could discuss the book. I would love to do that if somebody has a book that they're very interested in our opinions on. So just putting that out there.
All right.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm not going to commit to read absolutely anything that posts.
No. I said we will look through it. We can decide whether we want to.
There
or
are
not.
a lot
Yeah.
of self-publishers out there that who
I'm
could flood that request real easily.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, my reading list is fairly long right now, so I can't promise anything, but
If something really grabs us, throw your ideas out there.
yeah.
Yeah, I just don't want to do the send us your book thing and we will.
Oh, no,
read
no,
it.
no, no.
You know, it's
No,
like-
if you do send us your book, that's awesome. We will donate it to the
Rethought
ACA
Library.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's next?
Let's
Tracie.
see, what do I
Something
have? Yeah, I got one that Arkansas schools are now displaying their "In God We Trust" posters in the classrooms.
Awesome.
Yeah, state law allowed it to be displayed. Not all the schools are doing it. It's allowed. It's not mandated. Is my understanding.
It is not allowed.
Well,
It's just
here's the
so
thing that's painful, right? Is that here's how it works. In God We Trust being the national motto, it's very hard to ban it. So when someone puts it up, when you put it on a license plate, when you put it on money, and people go to court, it's really hard to get this banned because it is the national motto. So they go in and they say, this is not about promoting a religion. This is history, tradition, blah, blah, blah. And then when they come out, the people that are actually the constituency are like, all right, we got Christian God back in the schools.
Right.
And I almost wish that the courts could kind of address that. Because when the lawyer goes in and says this has nothing to do with promoting religion, and then the student files a lawsuit, and then all the angry Christians can like converge on that kid and make their life a living hell, I would like the judge to see that this argument that this is just a traditional historic motto, blah, 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 really isn't what's going on. This is the veneer. This is the secular paint job that goes over the religious furniture. And what they're selling is Jesus in the classroom. And since they can't say, we love Jesus on the poster, they say, hey, we've got this national motto, and it can be sold under the radar because it's not, it's just this deistic kind, it's just unidentified God, and nobody really knows what that means. And it could be anybody's God. It's like, yes, I'm sure this is anyone's God, and this is why you're putting it in the schools. And, we all understand how much these Buddhists are constantly trying to put God in the schools. So I'm sure that's,
Yeah.
And so it's like, there is no doubt what this is, except in a courtroom where a lawyer goes in and argues that it is absolutely what it is not.
Right. They're arguing that it's tradition or that it is some kind of ceremonial deism that's permissible or whatever. Ceremonial deism does not provoke the kind of vitriol that you see when these kinds of cases go to court.
Yeah, take these posters down. Sorry, I think I just hit a mic, but take these posters down and see who gets flamed.
Yeah.
It's not going to be. You're not going to have a problem with Muslims, freaking out that the posters
Or the history professors who are like, put that piece of history back up on the wall.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, when my kids started school here, I spent a lot of time in the classroom volunteering, and my jaw was on the floor the first time I was there in the morning, and they do the pledge and all that stuff. But then they have the moment of silence. Could there be a more thinly veiled prayer moment?
I think that's actually been successfully challenged in some cases.
That still happens in their
That's
schools.
unfortunate.
My kids'
I
schools.
do want to say in reading this article, just FYI, although it does say that it's not mandatory in the classrooms, it says that the law does require the motto to be displayed in some form in public buildings maintained with state funding. The bill passed in Arkansas House 78-1.
Ooh.
And in the Senate 20-2. Wouldn't you like to be the one person in that house? Oh, can you imagine the voting? Like, it's always me. It's always one.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh my gosh.
this is hideous. It reminds me of that movie, what was it, The Revisionaries, when you're watching the voting for the Texas School Board, and it's like, there's the black member and there's the woman member, and it's like, they're both, you could tell they're both kind of secular, and they're getting voted down like again and again. It's like I said, whatever, 8-2, vote on this again, 8-2.
Yeah.
It's like, let me guess where the next vote's going to be. Oh, 8-2. What a shock.
Who
Great.
it's going to be? Oh my God.
Yeah. Ooh, it's got to be frustrating.
And this whole argument from tradition about this, never mind that this was not the traditional motto of the United States, that it was revised in response to the Red Scare.
Right.
And it had nothing to do with tradition or anything.
Right.
Because if you posted our traditional motto from that we originally had, I don't think you'd get anybody complaining about that, except the religious,
People that are mad it's not in God we trust anymore.
right. The religious right wing would be foaming at the mouth because you didn't post their.
They'd probably freak out even if it was suggested as like an alternate. Even if we say, hey, let's have it as dual mottos. You keep your In God We Trust, and then a pluribus unum will also be adopted as a national motto along, like co-national models. I think they would still crap themselves even in that.
Yeah, they would.
It's not enough that they have a space. It's that they have to own the space.
Right.
Yeah.
And control the narrative. And here we go, back around full circle. Are we about done?
I got nothing.
Okay.
Oh, I do have a few other little things. I've got
Oh,
a
good. Let's
Idaho, what is it? Idaho candidate says punishing women with the death penalty would cut abortions.
Yeah.
Go Idaho candidate, right? Like, wow.
But this is the pro-life candidate, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
He's going for lieutenant governor, so this
Yeah.
is no small potato. He wants.
Well, and the interesting argument that he makes on that is that no women would actually be killed under this law
Right.
because the law itself would be enough
Such
of
a
a
deterrent.
deterrent that women just wouldn't get abortion.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Because
it's-
nobody ever murders anybody
Yeah.
in Texas.
Or no woman has ever risked her life to get a back alley
Right.
abortion.
Never.
You know.
No.
So this guy, I mean, obviously he does not even understand the first thing about this issue.
Well, I pointed out that if you just simply executed everyone that can get pregnant, it would end abortion.
That's right.
And so I have better legislation that I would like to, I should send him my idea because
God.
it's the perfect final solution.
And you can get out of
this
being
problem.
executed if you take the chastity pledge and put one of those little silver
You
rings on.
either can be sterilized or executed. It's your choice,
Yeah.
one or the other. But we've got to end this whole abortion thing. So
Yeah.
let's do this.
God.
Yeah, and it's just absolutely that it's just never going to stop. They're never going to stop. We had what else was the one? I think it was a Georgia. Yeah, here we go. Georgia politician publicly using the N-word as Atlanta suburb declares Confederate History Month. Hooray! Confederate History Month.
But they're very fine people.
They are fine. And this guy is the head of the fine people. And if only they would have let him finish, they would have seen how not racist he is as he's like throwing down the N-word, talking about how this used to be how it was, right? And he, I think, it's like, it's as offensive as this is, this was the quote. I told you at the time that there were white folks and there were black folks when I was growing up, Mr. Johnson said, speaking to Mr. McCord from the podium. There was white trash, my family, and there was N-Town. I lived next to N-Town.
Well, that makes him,
The comment immediately caught Mr. McCord off guard while the other board members sat quietly. So, I mean, I would like to think they were in stunned silence, but I'm thinking that in Georgia, maybe that's not the case. So he says, you live next to what town? He asked Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Johnson's matter of fact reply, N-Town, son. I'm telling you, son, now that changed, I'm no longer white trash. And he says, hold on a second. Anyway, this is,
you're a
goes
bigot.
on. Yeah.
big, giant.
McCord, please let him get to the point so we can move on, Mr. Holberg said. So it's like, please sit down and quit, asking him to keep repeating this embarrassing crap because,
Oh, no, I would have said, no, let's get this documented completely.
Yeah, the guy
Explore
said
this- put
the
this
response
on record.
was he can get to his point, but I'm not going to sit here. Maybe y'all are comfortable with it. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and let this man use this type of language. If nobody else is offended, I am. Now, if y'all want to clap and think that that's okay for this gentleman to stand in 2018 and get here at the Board of City Commission meeting 2018, the Civil War is over and he's using the N-word not once, not twice, 3 times. And he just continues to say it with not one word about who it offends.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then the response here is, my skin is white, my neck is red, and I was born in southern bed, he said. Nothing wrong with that. I hope it doesn't offend anybody. It's like, wow. Yeah,
Captain Clueless.
I propose we have a list of words that can and cannot be used here at the commission meeting, Bonnie. It's like, how... I hate that response where it's like, hey, you've got this like grotesquely racist label that everybody understands is just completely not okay.
Yeah.
And when someone calls you out for using it, it's like, well, maybe somebody needs to just make this list of words so we know what is okay and what is not okay. It's like, look, they're talking about one, use an ounce of common sense here. And I don't know what rock you're under in this town, wherever this was, this particular Georgia town. I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna slam the whole state, as tempting as it might be, but coming from Texas, I maybe don't have big room to talk. So, but I just don't understand how they just get this that whole, and I see that response so often, not just with this, but so many things where it's like, well, if you're going to say I can't use this word, well, why don't you just, kill me for free speech and martyr me at the altar of free speech? And it's like, look, it's a word. Don't use it. It's not okay here. It's not, and just some decorum. You're council members. Like, try just a little bit. I mean, you have constituents. Do you really think they want to hear this?
Maybe understand that that's a person.
Yeah.
With autonomy and so forth. Like,
and that this language is completely denigrating.
Mm-hmm. That's a person there. Don't have to have empathy, according to Tracie, which I agree with.
Yeah.
Just understand that that's a person. And be fair.
Don't forget you're dealing with an agent.
Yep. Someone with agency. All righty.
The other really, just as long as I'm running down the state list of what the fuck.
Is it going to be more ugly?
Oklahoma Republicans suggest turning kids over to ICE if they don't speak English.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
My favorite comment at the page was, that's right, they need to grab and drag in all of those deaf children.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that, and that's, they just don't even think before they open their mouths. There were so many layers of wrong with that, starting with no national language. So why is this even coming up? And, honestly, is anybody even confused about what language they're listening for? Right. Mm-hmm. This is like what I was saying before about the, God in the schools, and no, it's not the Christian God. And it's like, oh, you're not going after the Hispanic population, right? I mean, this is about, if you heard someone speaking Norwegian, you would totally be all over that. Mm-hmm. No, I think there's no doubt who we're talking about, because they're getting completely maligned recently more than ever. Mm-hmm. Completely tons of dishonest fear-mongering happening toward the Hispanic community, and this is really, really unacceptable.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a horde of rapists on the way from Honduras.
I was so so they're leaving because of political violence and fear over political violence and other issues as well. And the way he described it made it sound like they were the violent people. And it's like, no, that when you're talking about these levels of rape, you're talking about within the political violence sphere that they're leaving, right?
Yeah.
So, but what he actually said, and what it sounded like, I'm sure, to the people listening, was, you're saying that this is like a horde of rapists coming across the border. It's like, no, this is a horde of women and children and some men that are trying to get away from a violent situation. I mean, if you're going to sit there and say that you don't want rapists to be allowed in this country, and you're going to equate these people with racists, and then you're going to say you don't want rape victims allowed in this country, and we're going to equate that,
Well, but they bring the rapists with them, right?
I don't know what this is. It's like, it was so disheartening. And it reminded me of how they go on and on about the horrible conditions in the sanctuary city. And it's like, no, we are a relatively safe city.
Yeah.
And also they were doing this thing about the military now is going to be at the border to police documentation. I don't know. They're going to have the military, is the National Guard going to be called out for SAT testing now, make sure everybody has their ID. I mean, I don't know.
Number 2 pencils here.
But they had a woman watering her lawn out in front of her house in Laredo, and they were interviewing her, and she's like, I don't know. Like, I keep hearing about all this, horrid violence that I'm supposed to be. And she goes, I'm just watering my lawn. Like, it's...
Well, and to be clear, the he that you're referencing is our Twitterer-in-chief, who, makes these bizarre statements. There's a caravan of migrants, refugees from Honduras. They're making their way through Mexico. They're hoping to find sanctuary in the U.S. And again, they're fleeing political violence. And anyway, a lot of this came as a misquote from an LA Times article that talked about all the sexual violence that a lot of these migrant women have experienced in Honduras. And one of the reasons they want to come here is to get away from that.
Yeah.
And so his response is, well, let's send them back into that environment, because how else can you care for a rape victim than to send them back to wherever they got raped in the first place, right? But the other thing is, this whole idea of sending the National Guard to the border, we've done this before. This is not a new idea. It's been done forever because, we've got relatively porous borders. Mm-hmm. They're far less so than they used to be. But, I mean, I remember back in the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton, he sent some troops to augment the Border Patrol. It's been recycled over and over again. And the last time it happened, where there was like a big push, it was a disaster because there were armed National Guard troops on the border, and they actually shot a U.S. citizen who was there legally at the border. And so it's a big deal. And this is a bad idea because Border Patrol is not a military mission. We have a law enforcement agency that's charged with that specific mission.
Right.
It is a law enforcement function.
Yeah. We have Border Patrol agents.
Yeah.
We do have people tasked with patrolling the border.
Who are specifically trained for this.
And if you need more, hire more.
Right. And the U.S. military is not trained for that mission. And you cannot use the military for law enforcement except under very limited circumstances, and we don't have those circumstances on the border.
I want to mention, it says here, states including Montana and Nevada, each led by GOP governors, refused to send troops to aid the president's efforts, calling the move a whim and inappropriate use, respectively, even as Trump is working to halt the steadily increasing rate of illegal crossings. So there's a couple states that are declining to participate, led by GOP governors. I honestly don't know who's got the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
I don't know ultimately if the National Guard goes out of a state base. I mean, it's called the National Guard, so my first thought would be
the National Guard actually is that's state troops. They report to the governor of the state.
Okay.
So the only way you can get National Guard troops is if you federalize those guard units, and you can't federalize individual guardsmen. You have to federalize, basically call up the entire unit. So that's why in the Vietnam War, when people were looking for exemptions, they tried to get in the National Guard versus the reserves. Individual reservists can be mobilized for specific jobs. Only entire units from the National Guard can be mobilized because the governor actually...
So if the governor says, I'm not sending them, and the president says they're going, how does that work?
Then he would have to go to Congress, and Congress would have to declare some kind of emergency or whatever to mobilize guard units from that state.
Interesting.
Well, the other thing is there's no clue about how he's going to pay for this either, because you have to pay them. The state doesn't. If it's like
I hear
federal,
the Pentagon has tons of extra money.
they got some extra money.
Oh.
Mattis must wake up every morning and look at the Twitter feed and just
Pull the covers back over his head?
you're just like, what the fuck?
It's amazing what funding can suddenly be found for.
Yeah.
As opposed to other things like education or, don't have the money for that, but got the money for this.
Yeah.
So.
It's about time.
Yes, it is.
Next, Godless Bitches 2.0, we will have a special guest, Mandisa Thomas, who is the founder and president of Black Non-Believers.
And also on the board of American Atheists.
Well,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But wait, there's more. And she used to be on the board of Foundation Beyond Belief. So that's when I got to work with her, and she's awesome.
She is an awesome activist. I'm so looking forward to that episode.
It's going to be awesome.
Yes.
Yes. So I would like to thank Vern and Mark and who else is back there doing all the good stuff to keep this working. Thank you so, so much. And let's end with this. We don't need a savior. We have each other. It's all we've ever had and all we'll ever need.
Thanks.